Oh, I knew looking at the camera. Is that where I'm? Okay, I just want to make sure I'm here, bro.
You good now?
Yeah,
You sure?
yeah. Let's get it, bro.
All right. You ready? You ready for this?
Hello, audience.
CPGM Juice of Couch Potato General Manager back once again, and I have a special guest today. I have Matt Hicks, the FF educator on Twitter, the content creator and host of the Rookie Big Board YouTube channel. How you doing, Matt?
I'm good, man. I appreciate you having me on here, man. It's always fun chatting.
Absolutely. I've been following your work for quite some time. We have interacted over the years quite a bit. And I thought it was probably past due time to have this conversation, put it on wax. So excited to have you on our platform. Of course, I made reference to your YouTube channel, which has grown very rapidly. And like I said, hopefully, this opportunity kind of gets an opportunity for our viewers to get familiar with your works and what you have to offer. Because again, like I said, I have a lot of respect for not only your ability to evaluate film, but certainly your ability to kind of translate that into actual fantasy football advice and success. So, and that is a unique skill set. That is certainly a unique skill set. So I'm excited to have you. Why don't you tell our audience just a little bit more about your platform and what you do, your philosophy in terms of how you go about doing things?
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks again for having me on here. For me, I really try to focus on looking at the value of rookies as they transition from the college game into the NFL. So it involves, every level of football, tracking these guys as their high school recruits, as they're heading into college, following along on their college journey, ranking them as Devy players and following them all the way here until they get to the NFL draft. And then, of course, interpreting their value throughout their rookie season. So, with the Rookie Big Board, the podcast, the YouTube channel, even extending to the patreon.com/the FF educator and the Rookie Big Board rankings. It's a 365 process, the NFL side of things and the college side of things. But, in terms of the process, I've been doing this, in a more formal lens here the last 3 or 4 years. I've really refined my process to, it's a film-based process. I measure out traits, and I've tried to look at historically what traits translate to fantasy football specific production, and how we can, weigh that in a formula that I've built out here. And, eventually a player gets a tape score. And then, of course, post-draft, they get matched up with what I call the opportunity index, or, you could be the best player on tape, but if you're not going to touch the ball, it doesn't mean anything. Right. So we kind of balance those two things out and get, the Rookie Big Board rating. And that's what goes into building my big board of rankings.
Very nice. Very nice. So let's jump right into this 2021 NFL draft class as it pertains to kind of how you project those rookies. And again, as you've mentioned, you're tracking these guys from the latter years of their high school career throughout their college tenure into the pros. So the big headline, of course, the most single important position, the quarterback position, obviously got a lot of attention with a pretty impressive class here. And those top 5 guys, who are you most bullish on for dynasty purposes?
Yeah, I mean, obviously Trevor Lawrence, I think is pretty clear in a way the quarterback one for a lot of folks. So I think, really where the conversation starts is Justin Fields, Trey Lance, and Zach Wilson, of course. And I have them in that order: Justin Fields 2, Trey Lance 3, and Zach Wilson 4. So, when you're thinking about who has the most aggressive ranking, it's probably Trey Lance there, right? Because I think for a lot of folks, he's falling lower, despite the fact that he was the 3rd overall selection. I think a lot of folks are nervous that he's not quite a fully developed quarterback. For me, there's a lot of things I like on Trey Lance's tape. And, if we're talking fantasy football specific context, it starts with the legs, right? I mean, having that athleticism just naturally gives you a huge bump in fantasy football upside, right? And that's what we should be playing for, upside. But it's not just, I don't want to get the idea that Trey Lance is just a scrambler out there. I mean, he's a good runner, but he's a physical runner as well.
Yeah.
And where I've been kind of trying to hype him up as a fantasy asset is in the red zone. I mean, you look at the way Josh Allen scores touchdowns, it's primarily in those red zone opportunities. And I could see San Francisco giving Trey Lance those opportunities as well. And I like to point out, a lot of a kind of talk has been made about the fact that Trey Lance is coming from the FCS, playing just one season North Dakota State. And does that make him pro ready? Well, I think it makes him as pro ready as any of these other guys out there. I mean, naturally you look at the FCS team and you have questions about that. But if you look into what the quarterback, to be the starting quarterback at North Dakota State, it requires a lot. They force them to do the game planning throughout the week. They have multiple stages throughout the week that they need to be able to prove that they can game plan themselves, break down the film, create their own film, and analyze that throughout the week. Then when you get to game day at North Dakota State, you're watching Power 5 college football on Saturdays, right? What do you see on the sidelines? Almost every team now, man. They got the giant signs, right, with the funky symbols and everything. They're calling them the plays. They don't have that at North Dakota State. Trey Lance is at the line. He's calling what he sees on defense. He's calling his own checks. He's calling out the blitzes, right? And he's making adjustments at the line of scrimmage. And Trey Lance, 16-0 as a redshirt freshman at North Dakota State, playing against the best competition in the FCS, and he won them a national championship. So for me, Trey Lance, same amount of career starts as Mac Jones. So I love his tools. Do I think he needs some time to develop? Yeah, for sure. But is he mentally, he's just as prepared. And I'm not knocking Justin Fields or Trevor Lawrence, but I think Trey Lance was asked to do probably more on a game-to-game basis in terms of mentally prepping and mentally preparing for the game. And again, that's not knocking Lawrence and Fields. They did what they were asked to do, but they have some really built-out schemes that they were playing within.
Definitely. We've had so many debates and so many different conversations about those 5 quarterbacks. And when we get to Trey Lance, we talk about the fact that there's so few pass attempts, right? That's kind of the detractor that most people point to. But as you mentioned, what they're asking him to do at North Dakota State is unlike anything the other quarterbacks are being asked to do. He's making the checks at the line. He's dealing with protections. He's playing from under center. He's turning his back to the defense when he's doing those play action fakes and then having to reassess what's happening around him. So absolutely. I do think when you think about certain aspects of preparation and the quarterback position, playing it at the highest level, he is actually ahead of the curve in certain instances. Ultimately, he'll need more snaps. He'll need more opportunities to do the physical part of it. But certainly, as it pertains to the mental aspect of it, I think he's right there in line, if not ahead of some of those guys among those top 5. You also had, and I noticed this throughout the draft cycle, you were talking up Jamie Newman. You were talking up Jamie Newman. And I actually got an opportunity to see him at Mobile, see him live, and I was expecting big things from him as well, and it just didn't quite materialize. What do you think happened there?
Yeah, potentially nobody hurt their draft stock more this past year than Jamie Newman. I think for Newman, there were a lot of question marks about the timeliness of his decision to opt out. So, Jamie Newman, going back to 2019, put together a nice final season at Wake Forest. It was impressive, dual threat ability. Another guy, I believe he's like 230. I think he's like 6'3", 230. But, if he's got legs, he's athletic. But one of the top things I look for in my athletic quarterbacks is, do they look to throw the ball first? It's actually a very similar trait that I like about Justin Fields' game. Both Justin Fields and Jamie Newman, although that they're mobile, they are looking to throw the ball first. Unless it's a designed run, running is the last choice, which I think is really a good translation to the NFL. So, back to Newman specifically, he had the opportunity, consistently was being mocked in the first round of NFL drafts. When he decided to go to Georgia accepts him as a graduate transfer. It looks like an ideal scenario. Put him on the national stage, get him the coaching with the UGA coaching staff, and it was a cakewalk of a job. I mean, he had the job. We saw what happened to Georgia rolling out Stetson Bennett this past season. And I think, I've been really trying to reflect on Jamie Newman more and what happened. I think a couple things happened. First, I think his decision to opt out so close to the season and how bad of a spot it put the Georgia football team, I don't think that landed well with NFL teams. And that would be my interpretation of a big reason that his stock fell. And the second part is exactly what you referenced here. If you opt out, right, you better show up when it's time. And, to opt out for the entire final season of your career and then to get invited to the Senior Bowl, come to Mobile, and not impress. I mean, the bar is high, right? Even if he went there and was average, it's not good enough. You have to be fantastic. I mean, we saw Kenny Gainwell. Kenny Gainwell impressed at his pro day And that still only got him so far.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I just, put those two together. Maybe Philadelphia's got a thing for some of these guys that opted out. Maybe they didn't care as much as some other teams, but, it was disappointing with Jamie Newman for me. If you want to take a late, if you're fourth, fifth round of a rookie draft, if you're playing in deeper leagues, maybe you look at him then, but he's got to be somebody that, despite the fact that he's got some really fantastic tools, sometimes the tape only gets you so far. And undrafted draft capital, that's not a good spot to be.
You're definitely right about that. Is there any other quarterback that we should be paying attention to outside, of course, the top five? And then, of course, you have the Kellen Monds of the world, Kyle Trask. You thinking maybe a year or two from now, perhaps. And any other quarterback that you think dynasty owners should be kind of, putting a pin in and making sure that they keep an eye on him as their rookie drafts elapse?
I think it's a great question. Where I've kind of been fielding this one a lot is in the third round. I keep getting questions when we get to the third round. It seems like folks are finally comfortable considering the idea of this next tier of quarterbacks, right? And for a lot of folks, it's Davis Mills, it's Kellen Mond, and it's Kyle Trask. Like, those are the names I kind of consistently hear. And to be honest, I'm a big proponent in Superflex. You take your shot at the quarterback position, you see what happens. I'm not really. I think there's better uses of your third round pick. I don't know. This a lot of years in the past, like I was somebody who advocated for Jacob Eason. If he happened to have won out that job, if they didn't trade for Carson Wentz, fantastic third round pick. If he doesn't, it's a third round pick. But you look at Davis Mills in Houston. I think best case scenario. I mean, you want to talk about a guy who's not pro ready. I mean, I think he's played 12 career games, but over 4 years at Stanford, injuries, he's been consistently beat out. I mean, he got beat out for the job by KJ Costello, who went undrafted. What does that tell you? Yep. So Davis Mills, I mean, I think his best case scenario is that at the very end of the season, he wins the job. And then what happens? The Houston Texans are going to be picking in the top 3 next year, and they're taking Spencer Rattler, Sam Howell, Jaden Daniels, pick your guy, right? So it's not happening for Davis Mills. Kyle Trask, man, it shocked me at first, but, thinking about this, what has Kyle Trask done best in his career? That man's a backup, right? Like, he backed up De'Aaron King in high school 3 years, still got his scholarship at Florida.
Right.
Good for him. I'm not knocking him. And then for the first 2.5 years at Florida, he's backing up Felipe Franks before Felipe Franks gets injured, ends up going undrafted. So, Kyle Trask, he lands in Tampa Bay. Why not back up the GOAT, right? But he might not even be the 2. I think he's the QB3. So I'm not interested in him. And then Kellen Mond, if you're going to take your shot, I'll take it with Kellen Mond. He's toolsy. He's got a nice arm. He's almost too rigid in his mechanics. Oftentimes we knock quarterbacks for being too loose. I mean, he's he's stiff, man.
Right.
So maybe they could break that mechanics down a little bit, make it a little looser. I mean, Kirk Cousins is on, I think, an expiring contract. Yeah. I don't think that Minnesota considers him to be the long-term solution. So, if another quarterback option came up, would they take that quarterback over Kellen Mond? Yeah, probably 9 out of 10 times, but maybe, right? So if you're going to take your shot, maybe you take it with Kellen Mond. I think he's the best, bang for your buck there in the mid-third. But, honestly, if I'm not getting, and I'm not even in on Mac Jones, if I'm not getting one of these first 4 guys, I think I'm just fading this year.
Punting. I got it. It's interesting that you made that point regarding Kellen Mond as it pertains to his mechanics, and that he's almost too mechanical with his mechanics. And I think, to your point, he's thinking about it a lot. He has come a long way as a passer, and of course he has the physical tools, but he's still thinking. He's not letting it rip necessarily on a consistent basis, and you can see it with respect to his footwork, his arm motion, the way he carries the football as he's going through his 3, 5, 7-step drop. So it's a really interesting point that you make there, and I've noticed, and I think quite a few people, I guess that kind of spooks them a little bit when it comes to Kellen Mond, because as you mentioned, I don't think the Vikings are sold on Kirk Cousins. They gave this 3-year experiment a try. They gave it the good old college try. And of course, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it was reported that had Fields slipped a little bit further, they were going to take him before trading down and selecting Christian Darrisaw. So definitely. Okay, that's great. Let's move on to the running back position. And of course, the general consensus is that you have a top 3. However you order them, however you rank them, whether you have them in separate tiers, it's typically Najee Harris, Travis Etienne, and Javonte Williams. I'd like to point out that it was you, Matt, who correctly predicted that Travis Etienne would end up in Jacksonville, despite Robinson being there. So I think that was maybe a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks out before the draft actually happened. And I certainly had not considered that. And you made mention of it. You said, we're not talking about this possibility and ultimately eventuality that Etienne could land there. But once you get past those backs, who are you targeting in dynasty drafts?
Yeah, it's so interesting. If it's like past the top three, I've been trying to look at trends across drafts I'm doing, just, tapping into what I'm seeing from other folks, mock drafts galore this time of the year. And there seems to be, two different trends that happens depending on how aggressive your league wants to get on this next tier of running back. So for me, coming in here, in my overall rankings, Najee Harris is 3, Travis Etienne is 8, Javonte Williams is 12. So I consider them all first round picks.
Right.
And then my next guy up, my running back 4 is Michael Carter down at 17 and Trey Sermon at 21. So for me, despite the fact that Michael Carter, I think, got a fantastic landing spot in terms of volume, I should say, I'm still not quite there until mid-second round. That's probably where I'm going to start taking Michael Carter. I prefer him late second round, but it seems like in most drafts, that's not what's happening. Folks are pushing Michael Carter and Trey Sermon up either late first round or early second round. And I'm just seeing it's history repeats itself, right? And it's frustrating for me because, if you look back at some recent drafts, who are the guys that we get the saltiest about, right? We get salty about Keyshawn Vaughn, Zach Moss, Darrell Henderson, Devin Singletary. And these are all guys who we probably wouldn't be that frustrated with if we just took them at their point of value, which is late second, early third. These are guys that could return value. But once you start pushing them to be first round picks, and then they don't automatically contribute to your fantasy team right away, then you get upset when you reached on them. And so what that naturally does, by the way, is it creates a ton of value at the wide receiver position. So it's like I'm just seeing history repeat itself. And it's frustrating because I like Michael Carter in his spot. I think Trey Sermon, despite having some really roller coaster college film, some real peaks and some real valleys there, his landing spot's great, and I want to get excited about it. But I can't take Trey Sermon at the back end of the first round, considering the fact that he is going to a crowded running back room. I know they're going to cut Hasty most likely. They're probably going to cut Wilson. Elijah Mitchell maybe makes the roster. He's probably a practice squad guy, and things start to open up a little bit for Trey Sermon. But it's still difficult to really see him as being, somebody who's going to get more than 40% of the volume right away. And it's hard as a running back if you're not getting, north of 40% of volume to really be a consistent fantasy contributor. So I like those guys, but just like we've been doing in similar years, I think we're pushing up their value too high.
Definitely. Who are we not talking about enough at the position?
At the running back position?
Yeah.
Man.
Another question. I got a follow up for you. So, later in those drafts, fourth round or so, you're looking at maybe a Javian Hawkins a little bit later. And anybody else that you kind of throw a flyer on at that juncture?
Yeah, I think that's a perfect way to ask the question because, past the guys that we just talked about, maybe you throw Kenny Gainwell into that group still. So past the top 6, we're shooting for it, right? We're just throwing the dart throws. And so, when I go back, when I get to the point of dart throws, there's going to be 2 things that I'm looking at in my evaluation process. I'm looking at my pre-draft tape scores and I'm looking at volume. And, one of the guys that I have been high on for a while, and you just said his name, it's Javian Hawkins out of Louisville. I got to be honest, I openly take my losses when I don't hit on guys. I thought Javian Hawkins was an early day 3 guy at the latest. I was very surprised to see him go undrafted. And I know he's a little undersized, but man, I loved his tape. You look at his ability to create space. I thought it was fantastic. He showed some real flashes of explosion, a great athleticism. I thought a great field vision. Now, again, like these NFL evaluators, man, I mean, they know more than I do, right? So I'm not, claiming that he, the NFL got it wrong by any means, but he had a high tape score for me, in just pure tape score. He was right up there, not in the top tier running backs, but right there in tier 2. And then you look at where he landed in Atlanta.
Yes.
There's some real opportunity here. I know he's an undrafted free agent, but We see this with the running backs, James Robinson, Phillip Lindsay, these guys, it only takes one person going down in front of them. And Atlanta did nothing this offseason. They haven't re-signed Todd Gurley. They signed Mike Davis. Well, if Mike Davis goes down, Javon Hawkins, he could be a guy who steps in, sees 50, 60% of the work, and all of a sudden, he goes from undrafted free agent to relevant. So, I'm looking for a clear path to volume. Obviously, anybody you're taking a dart throw on, something's got to happen, right? You got to project a little bit, but that's the kind of situation that I would be looking into. I like Javon Hawkins pre-draft, and Atlanta's not a bad spot.
No, not at all. Not at all. At what point are you pivoting to 2022? Let's just say, for instance, that Trey Sermon and Michael Carter are getting pushed up, as you mentioned, and they're just too rich for your blood. You're there early to mid-second round, and you're set at receiver, for example. At that point, are you considering maybe, parting with that too to get a one next year?
Yeah, if you're looking for running back specifically, I think that you can definitely look to pivot once you start getting into that mid-second round. Here's the thing about the 2022 class, and this is why I love, following these guys from college and looking at Devy, because, man, if you looked at last year's 2021 class a year ago, we wouldn't be looking at the same thing. So many changes happen over the course of the year. So you can kind of project what a class is going to look like, but things are going to be, moving around a ton. What I will say is that there's some significant running back talent that's eligible to declare in 2022, but that's going to be the key. If you're looking at locked in guys, and Breece Hall out of Iowa State, that's probably the one guy that you could say, he's going to declare, with a high level of confidence.
Certainty.
Breece Hall, 2 very productive seasons already at Iowa State. He's 6'1", 205. He works really well in between the tackles. He's got some big upside, and we're expecting another big year from Iowa State. Past that, you have some real potential. I'm a big fan of Eric Gray. He's now with Oklahoma. I thought he looked explosive with Tennessee. His stats are going to go through the ceiling playing in Oklahoma, running in that space. Isaiah Spiller out of Texas A&M, man, he put together some really, really nice tape in 2020. He broke out early as a freshman, but a lot of folks didn't believe it because he did it against all of his non-SEC opponents.
Sure.
Well, 2020 with COVID, we only got SEC opponents, and Isaiah Spiller stopped a lot of those critics. One guy not a lot of folks I think are high enough on is Jerrion Ealy at Ole Miss. I think in Lane Kiffin's run and shoot offense down there, Jerrion Ealy has looked really good. I think he's explosive. He navigates in between the tackles well. He's a fantastic athlete. Actually, what's been holding him back, I think, to this point in draft conversations is a lot of folks thought he was more interested in baseball because he's a 2-sport athlete down there. But the indications now are that he's focused on playing football professionally. And Kyron Williams out of Notre Dame, 5'9", 204. He had a really great, really productive season. I just listed 4 guys there that if they all declare, they could push that, high round 2 type, area, but none of those guys have to declare.
Right.
And we know running backs have been trending more recently towards declaring early, but look at Najee Harris, look at Travis Etienne. Those were guys we thought were locks to declare in the 2020 draft. So, maybe the lack of talent at the top pushes some of these running backs up. And by the way, I'll just throw out one sleeper name just for folks who really want to tuck into their back pocket. Jerome Ford, playing at Cincinnati, he is a senior. And I think he's somebody who, especially if some of these younger guys decide not to declare, he's somebody who could really benefit. Ford was originally a running back in the Alabama room, playing, basically doesn't get touches behind Najee Harris. And, he ends up transferring to Cincinnati, and they gave, Jared Dokes, the guy everyone's high on right now as another late round flyer, by the way. They gave Jared Dokes a lot of the carries, but it was so frustrating because when Jerome Ford was on the field, my man was tearing it up, right? So now it's Jerome Ford's team. In Cincinnati, it is the group of 5 team that could run the table this year. They are poised and in position to run the table and potentially be that group of 5 team that gets snubbed from the conversation. Sure. But with that comes a ton of national spotlight. His draft stock could soar. So I'm in on Jerome Ford too, but that's a really long answer to say there's no guarantees in this 2022 class either. So I'm all for flipping it. Don't reach for a guy if you don't need him on your roster. Flip that into a pick. But just proceed with a little bit of caution when it comes to running backs next year.
So, Matt, if memory serves me correctly, you are a Giants fan. Is that right?
That is unfortunately correct.
All right. It's weird what things I commit to memory. At any rate, of course, it looked like it might be Devontae Smith for quite some time there, and then it wasn't. And then you pivot to Kadarius Toney. Your thoughts on Kadarius Toney?
Man, it was tough. It was tough. And now I've let this sink in a little bit. And
Sure.
my initial reaction, when we traded out of 12, my first reaction was, man, like that could have been Justin Fields.
Sure.
We could have had Justin Fields. I think I was 11 actually is what we traded out of.
11. Yep.
And I was like, but I knew Gettleman wasn't replacing Daniel Jones. There wasn't Gettleman's tied with Daniel Jones. Jones fails, he fails. So I knew that wasn't happening. So we move out of 20. And I was pretty happy with it originally because, you were looking at what we needed. We really needed edge. We could have reached for offensive tackle, but we end up going, and trading back. And I'm cool with it because there's a lot of wide receivers that I would have been happy with at 20 as well. Kadarius Toney, it's tough, man. It's tough. I get it from an NFL perspective, right? From an NFL perspective, Dave Gettleman is literally doing whatever he can to give Daniel Jones more of a chance to succeed because he is tied with Daniel Jones. All right. So if Jones doesn't work this year, which I think will be the last year that they give him a shot because he has not developed so far, then he's out and Gettleman's out. And what's nice as a Giants fan is if Gettleman is out, he at least got us an extra first round pick next year that we may be able to package up to get into the quarterback conversation. And there can be some good quarterbacks in next year's draft. So that's your silver lining here. From a fantasy perspective, you're looking at a guy who needed manufactured production in college that doesn't translate to the NFL. You're looking at a team that doesn't pass the ball a lot or well. Add on top of that, they're going to pass the ball even less because Saquon Barkley is back this year. And by the way, Saquon Barkley soaks up targets. And now you've added Kenny Golladay on the other side of the field who is going to soak up targets. There's not going to be much left there for Kadarius Toney. So from an NFL perspective with the Giants, okay, fine. I'm okay with it because we got a pick next year.
Sure.
But from a fantasy perspective, I don't care about his draft capital. I'm just not drafting him. I don't care if he's around late 2. I'm letting him go. Let somebody else, be right about him is how I'm taking it.
Now, how much of that is associated with the play caller? Is it truly just an evaluation of Kadarius Toney? And I can understand where you're coming from in terms of the fact that, yes, he is dynamic with the ball in his hands, but it has to be manufactured. You have to scheme that up. What about the play caller? How much is that weighing in your thoughts with respect to Toney?
I'm glad you brought that up because Jason Garrett is not the guy that you want if you're banking your offense on creativity, right? He has just never been known for doing that. And I want to point out that not only do you have to take into account Jason Garrett, you have to go to Florida. And Dan Mullen has a reputation for scheming guys to success. I mean, he is known for that. Going all the way back to Mississippi State, he schemed up Dak Prescott, and he made him look really good. And it obviously worked out really well for the Cowboys, right? In going to Florida, you look at what happened when Kyle Trask was on there on an island without having the weapons to scheme him up in the bowl game. He looked terrible. Yeah. It was one of the reasons his draft stock fell so far. And so you go from a super creative-minded coach who understands how to highlight skill sets to Jason Garrett, who is kind of like a take-it-as-it-is type guy. I think he's not going to have the type of spark that you're going to be looking for. Now, Kadarius Toney ends up in with the Rams. Maybe we get a little bit more excited about it.
Yeah.
But it's tough in New York, man.
Again, general consensus, your top wideouts in this class, guys that can play inside or outside the numbers, were any amalgamation of Jamar Chase, Jalen Waddle, and Devonta Smith, as we mentioned earlier. Who's your guy outside of those three? Who's the guy that you're targeting in dynasty drafts?
Terrace Marshall, man. I'm a huge Terrace Marshall fan. I've really been advocating for him. I thought if he declared in 2020, he could have been a first round pick.
Wow.
I thought he came back and 7 touchdowns through the first 4 games of the season. LSU, man, fell apart. Yes. Miles Brennan went down with injury to their quarterback, and then things just fell apart after that for LSU. Now, when you look at Terrace Marshall, he is a field stretcher. He wins in the deep third of the field. He's got great acceleration. He's got great athleticism. I love his hands. And, he ends up falling in the draft. And I'm not going to lie, man, I was sweating it because I had this first round grade on this guy, and I've been pretty public and loud about it. And what we end up hearing, he falls all the way to Carolina, late second round. And what we hear is that a lot of these guys with a past injury history, so Marshall suffered a lower body injury in his final year of high school in his 2018 season at LSU. So what we hear is that it's not necessarily that Terrace Marshall was red flagged with injury concerns, but those yellow flags, because of the lack of information and clarity this year at the combine, they were never able to turn into green flags. And we saw this not just with Terrace Marshall. You look at a guy like Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, he was supposed to be, a pick in the teens, and he falls to 52, I believe, with Cleveland. So Terrace Marshall suffers a similar fate, but the fall is worth it because he lands with who? The Carolina Panthers and
Brady. His
2019 offensive coordinator, Joe Brady. And I love it for multiple reasons. Carolina, they have a volume vacancy there. If you look, man, Curtis Samuel left. They never filled in that vacancy. They're not giving it to Ian Thomas, right? Like that's not who's getting it. So, I pegged Terrace Marshall immediately in with 18% of the market share in my projections. You look at who's scoring touchdowns. DJ Moore, I know we want him to be a touchdown monster.
Sure.
He just hasn't proved to be. Robbie Anderson, I'm a big Robbie Anderson fan. He's not getting the touchdowns. So Terrace Marshall could. And my favorite thing about Terrace Marshall in Carolina is that I think he's going to play in the big slot. Robbie Anderson, he plays on the outside. He's in that flanker role. DJ Moore's your X right along the boundaries. So you put Terrace Marshall in the big slot, despite he's 6'3", 200. But if you look at how that's worked out just recently, look at Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb. It's a mismatch, and that's what the NFL is all about. So in tying this full circle, we were talking about, running backs being pushed up and wide receivers being pushed down. 204, 205, 206. I've been taking Terrace Marshall every single spot I can. I love it for him. I think it's an immediate impact, and I think he's somebody. And by the way, all of that I've talked about is just if Sam Darnold stays average. If they coach him up, if they develop him to be that top 3 quarterback he was supposed to be, we could be looking at something really special with Terrace Marshall.
So I mentioned before, and I remember correctly that you were a Giants fan. You're also a Vols fan.
Yep.
You are a Tennessee Volunteer. So Josh Palmer, I had an opportunity to see him in Mobile live. I was really impressed. That was really my first true exposure to him. I saw a couple of games, but I had not gotten into the film just yet. And that was my first true exposure to him. And I came away impressed. You could see the traits that he has. And of course, quarterback concerns just couldn't necessarily get him the ball. What are your thoughts? And what do you think of the landing spot in Los Angeles?
Yeah, man, I got to tell you, I was hearing consistently that the NFL liked Josh Palmer, but I was not hearing that they liked Josh Palmer this much.
Right.
It's interesting. I'm reading off my notes here for Josh Palmer, and I have him, projects as a solid, reliable, rotational wideout at the next level. I said he's got consistent hands. He's got good body positioning. He really has a nice catch radius. He hauls in everything. And I'll jokingly credit that to catching balls from volunteer quarterbacks here the past couple of years. You get a pretty good catch radius. You try to haul in some of the passes that he's had coming in his way from Jarrett Garantano. But what I thought was really interesting here, he doesn't really separate downfield. I should say he can separate well downfield, despite the fact that he's not the fastest. He's not the most athletic. He's just one of these guys that just finds a way to win. He feels the ball well, he tracks the ball well, and he's not going to jump out on tape. He's just going to kind of consistently get the job done. So, there was a lot of guys I was hoping that would land with the Chargers. I thought maybe Jalen Waddle could fall to him in round 1 and they could take him. I thought maybe they'd be in on Tylan Wallace. And it'll be interesting. I think what's good is that Josh Palmer played primarily along the boundary at Tennessee, and he's 6'1", 210. I'd say if you saw him play, you might think he's more 6'2", 6'2 and a half,
right?
Just because he seems to have a nice body presence about him. And he's going to be able to stay on the outside. Keenan Allen does kind of live in the slot. And then, of course, you have Mike Williams on the other side. And then who, right? Like who for, so you might not bank on his talent, but volume is king when you're talking fantasy football. So, Josh Palmer's there in the 3rd round, even early on. I think he's well worth your selection there. And, just by the chance that he puts it together. I think he could be a guy that ends up being a really good NFL pro and maybe never puts up the huge numbers that you love, but I think he's worth taking a shot on for sure. It does help, watching these guys in college and tracking them throughout. And the Tennessee has not only been a bad passing offense, they've never prioritized the pass.
Sure.
You'll see that change here with the new coaching staff coming in from UCF. But under Jeremy Pruitt, the Vols wanted to run the ball. And, occasionally they would pass. And defenses knew when they were passing the ball. So wide receivers were at a huge disadvantage. So, for Josh Palmer to be able to battle through that, he played all 4 years with the Vols, so he's experienced, he's pro-ready. And I think he comes with a high level of maturity. And clearly, the Chargers appreciated all those things about him and, took him in the third round. That's some legit draft capital there.
Absolutely. And I think it's worth noting that Mike Williams has had a challenge. It's been a challenge of him to stay healthy as well. So, of course, we know Keenan Allen's going to soak up a ton of targets. But to your point, given the draft capital that Josh Palmer got, being selected as early as he did, because I wasn't anticipating it either, there's a chance that he can make an immediate impact for your dynasty teams, certainly. Any other receiver in that late category? You mentioned it when we talked about the running backs with Javian Hawkins. Any other receiver that we were just, as in general, the community is not talking about enough, in your opinion?
Yeah, it's somebody who I thought was another shocking pick, another guy that I thought was taken maybe a little bit higher than we expected. He was a round 4 selection. And as we're watching draft night go by, right, there were a few teams where we said, take a wide receiver, man, just take a wide receiver. Give me my favorite guy and send him to Tennessee. And who do we get? Dez Fitzpatrick, which for a lot of folks is like, this is who we got. But you look at his profile, 6'2", 202. And you want to talk about another guy that was challenged with the scheme that he was playing in. Dez Fitzpatrick, a really difficult tape evaluation for me because the offense he was playing in did not highlight his skill set at all. I think he's quick. He's an athletic pass catcher. And I think he's actually got the ability to make a little something happen with the ball in his hands after the catch. But he ran barely any routes. Louisville was really just asking him to run, straight nines down the field, curls and occasional slant there.
Right.
But for the most part, Cunningham was not really the guy that was going to get you the ball downfield. If it was probably in a 50-50 jump ball type spot. And they were really running the ball a ton with Javian Hawkins, who we talked about earlier. So, I do have him with a nice sharp footwork ability. I have consistent hands on him and a nice catch radius. I also have him as a willing blocker, which is important in Tennessee, a team that's going to run the ball a ton. So I think he sees the field right away. You look at the Tennessee Titans depth chart.
Yeah. You
got Josh Reynolds and Cameron Batson. Come on. So, and then you don't even have the tight end anymore, right?
Not there anymore.
Yep. Yeah. Smith isn't there. Ferkser. And then you look at the running back situation, Derrick Henry doesn't catch passes.
Right. So
Ryan Tannehill's got to throw the ball to somebody. And although I think A.J. Brown could get north of 30% of the market share, somebody else needs to get the ball, right? So I just took Dez Fitzpatrick earlier today, I believe at 312 it's an IDP league. So that pushes it down. So in a regular super flex, that's probably about 304. I think there were, a few defensive guys off the board at this point, but in that spot, I think Dez Fitzpatrick, despite the fact that he's somebody, he didn't have a bad tape grade from me, but he didn't have a great one either. It was so hard to match him to the scheme. One of the most difficult things when we're evaluating players, we got to try to pull them out of their situations and really evaluate them in a bubble. And that's why you're talking about some great experiences being able to watch these players in Mobile. That's why those types of things are so important, because the skill set of the player could get lost easily in the scheme that they're asked to play in. And then they get to the NFL and we're shocked by what they could do when they're actually put in a position to succeed. And that's not knocking the college coaches either. The college coaches at the end of the day are there to win games, right? They would love to elevate these guys to the NFL draft. They want to help them along, but
it's not their job.
Yeah, it's not keeping them their job, right? So, it's no knock on these college coaches. Sometimes these guys, and Dez Fitzpatrick can be one of them, they end up being better pros than they are college players.
So let's shift gears to the wasteland position, as I like to call it, the tight end position. And of course, Kyle Pitts is the unicorn, as they call him. I'm not sure there's anyone who would suggest that obviously he isn't the crown jewel at the position in this rookie class. And as far as Dynasty is concerned, that he is a coveted commodity. But once you get past him, there was a little hive there for Brevin Jordan. I'm actually a Canes fan myself, so I was beating the drum for Brevin. But like most Hurricanes, there tends to be a little meat left on the bone. The coaching, as we mentioned, isn't always great, doesn't always put guys in a position to succeed. So once you get past Pitts, and let's set aside Brevin Jordan for now. We could come back to him, but let's set him aside. Is there any other tight end that you're in that mid to late third round part of the draft that you're willing to see if you can throw something against the wall and see if it'll stick?
Yeah, that's an interesting spot of the draft for tight end there. I mean, I am in on Pat Freiermuth. He's going to be off the board by then. You're looking down the board here, and if you take Brevin Jordan out of it, reading down the board, you're probably looking at Hunter Long, Tommy Tremble. Those are probably the two really the guys that I'd be interested in. Noah Gray, not in the late third, but like if you're in like a 5-round rookie draft, which I'm a degenerate, I'm in a couple 5-round rookie leagues now. I'm not going to pretend like I'm not. All right. Noah Gray landing with the Kansas City Chiefs. I mean, I thought he was a good pass catcher in college. I think he's a two-way player. He can block well. And Kansas City likes to run those two tight end sets. They do that quite a bit. So if Noah Gray can get on the field over, I think it's like Blake Bell is the other guy that's always out there for Kansas City.
Yep.
He's a sneaky guy. And, maybe it takes 3-4 years, but maybe when Kelsey's finally ready to start sunsetting some of those targets, maybe Noah Gray is, and I'm not comparing Noah Gray to Travis Kelce by any means, but, I think he's a good pass catcher in an offense that throws the ball well. So, that would be like your late pick. But, in that range that you mentioned, I think Hunter Long, he's somebody I had a good evaluation on. I thought he could be like a red zone type guy that could soak up some of those red zone targets. In Miami, maybe they want to run some 12, or some 22 out there, but Mike Gesicki's not getting off the field, and I know they split him out wide. Hunter Long can stay in, but that's he's not as athletic as Mike Gesicki, but that's kind of Hunter Long's skill set too. I mean, he's a pass catcher, and he can block. Don't get me wrong, but for fantasy, we want him for the pass catcher. But the guy that I would say don't sleep on. And, don't overinvest in him, but don't sleep on Tommy Tremble. I mean, this guy is athletic, right? Notre Dame used him for everything. He was catching passes downfield, and he was running lead blocks too. And he was cracking some guys with those lead blocks. Right. He's physical. He was a real late riser. And I think, he ended up his final draft position was round 3, pick 83. So late day 2. I had heard from my NFL folks, they thought he was going to be a round 2 pick because the NFL was really high on him late. So, I think there's something intriguing there. And I talk about the creativity of the Notre Dame offense with Tommy Tremble. Hey, you got Matt Rule and Joe Brady, college coaches, really at the heart there. I think they might be scheming up something funky with Tommy Tremble. And I mean that in a good way. And, Ian Thomas ain't it, right?
No.
Ian Thomas, I mean, we have been there. We have tried that. Yes. It's not happening. All right. Absolutely. We've all taken the L. All right. Let's just accept it.
Everybody at some point. Everybody at some point has gotten the short end of that stick. Absolutely.
Exactly. So, maybe Tommy Tremble ends up being, maybe not right away, but, most tight ends aren't going to hit for you right away. If you got if you got a taxi squad spot to burn, you've got worse selections to make than Tommy Tremble late in the draft.
All right, sounds good. Let's circle back to Freiermuth and Brevin Jordan. What's your thoughts there? I actually really like Jordan's landing spot, despite the fact that, of course, Houston is in flux altogether. I think he immediately becomes, perhaps the most talented tight end on that roster. So what's your thought process on those two players?
Yeah, Brevin Jordan, man, I'm a huge Brevin Jordan fan. It was so... Man, I don't want to say heartbreaking. That sounds over dramatic, but you watch his tape and you see this overly athletic ball player, and then he gets to his pro day, and all of a sudden his athletic testing is not great, and he just gets destroyed for that. And I'm not trying to knock the athletic testing. Obviously he didn't perform the way he should have, but you can't flip on that tape and tell me you don't see an athlete. I mean, you got this tight end hurdling ACC defensive backs. I mean, not once, but multiple times on tape. So that was challenging. Brevin Jordan was another guy with a medical history, which this was not the year for that. So,
no, not at all.
I mean, I'll be lying to you if I said I wasn't shocked that he fell that far. Even when I had heard his draft stock was falling, I thought, early round 4 could be the furthest that he falls, and he goes round 5. But you're right. I mean, Houston at least saw some emphasis. I mean, Houston didn't have a lot of picks, right? So to take a pick with Brevin Jordan, they saw something, and I could be wrong, but I believe they may have traded up to make sure they got Brevin Jordan in the 5th round. So, clearly there was something they saw there. In desperate need of weapons for whoever's throwing the ball, it's probably going to be Tyrod, if we're, operating in a realistic world. So maybe that helps him. You have to think that, like you mentioned, he's more talented than Jordan Akins, right? Which I think is probably the starting tight end pre-draft. So do I want to invest high capital on him? No. But if you were a Brevin Jordan fan before the draft, feel empowered to go and get him, because who knows who's going to be throwing the ball in Houston next year. It should be one of these top quarterbacks in the 2022 draft. And if they click, that could end up being something pretty nice. And when it comes to Pat Freiermuth, I'm in on Pat Freiermuth. Mid-second round in a tight end premium, I'm willing to take him as early as like 204, 205. In a non-tight end premium, 207, 210, that's kind of the range that I'm seeing him go. I think he's a great two-way tight end. I mean, he is going to smash you in the mouth. He's going to contribute to that running game in Pittsburgh, which doesn't help you for fantasy, but I think it's a perfect NFL fit. But he's got great hands, really underrated pass catcher there at Penn State. And, you look at what the realistic situation of the Pittsburgh Steelers offense is. You have to do a couple things. One, you have to do like a 2 to 3 year projection whenever you're talking about tight ends. I do think Ben Roethlisberger could use Pat Freiermuth underneath early on this year, because we're looking at not the best arm strength at this point in his career. And so he's going to need these guys like Pat Freiermuth in short field. But, project out a little further. Juju is probably not going to be back next year. He almost didn't come back this year. That leaves a huge vacancy vacuum. I'm not sure if Eric Ebron makes it to the season this year. If it is, they're probably going to move on from him after that. So that's volume moving around. I know a lot of folks are worried about what happens after Ben Roethlisberger, and I know Ben Roethlisberger has had a long career in the NFL, but I got to tell you, at this point, it's going to be hard to downgrade from Ben Roethlisberger. I agree. Especially because, everybody talks about, the Steelers salary cap. It's so bad. It's so bad. They'll never be able to bring in a free agent. It's bad because of Ben Roethlisberger. Right. He's the one killing them. So once they see that contract expire, they'd be in the market for the big free agent quarterback, whatever that looks like next year. I know they've got a lot of, backup options. I could even see him trying to trade for like a Marcus Mariota, try to have like a resurgence in his career at some point. So, it's tough whenever you can't project the quarterback situation out a few years, but I think no matter what, Pat Freiermuth is going to be a reliable guy underneath. I mean, if you watch college football, Penn State's quarterback, Sean Clifford, oh my goodness, man. If you could be a productive a tight end catching balls from Sean Clifford, right, you could probably catch balls from me at that point. All right. Like that's how off target it is. And I like to think, I played a little bit of good intramural college, flag football in my day. I could put it on spot, but my point here is that, he's battled through some pretty tough quarterback play in the past. So I would trust him to be able to persevere through that for fantasy purposes moving forward.
Matt, I'm going to get you out of here on this. I want to give you credit for your tenacity and the depth of your analysis and the fact that you are doing this year round. There's really no time off for you when you're tracking these prospects at such an early age. And I had heard of Jared Patterson, but it was the dog days of summer last year. Of course, what happened into the world during this time frame. And I had not yet turned the tape on. I had heard of him, but not yet turned the tape on. And you were cranking out some footage of him and really bigging him up. And I started to look and I was like, wow. And then, of course, we saw what he did this season. But that wasn't even really, I guess, the zenith of his performance. It was really the 2019 year where he really performed very well. So give me another guy. Give me another guy like that the community, the Dynasty community, going into 2022 at any position is probably hasn't heard of or isn't necessarily talking about very much at this juncture.
Oh, that's a good one. Let's see here. I'm digging through my boards. I was pulling up my Jaret Patterson notes. I thought you were pitching me a Jaret Patterson because I love Jaret Patterson. You know, I talked a little bit about Jerome Ford, who I really like earlier. Yeah. You know, one guy that I'll kind of point out who could be flying a little bit under the radar as well, but I think, you know, could make a nice push. Zonovan Knight out of North Carolina State. I guess I just learned a couple weeks ago, I guess his nickname is Bam. So you could go Bam Knight or Zonovan Knight. You know, he's 6'0", he's 197. So he's got some pretty good size. He's been really productive for North Carolina State. In both of his first 2 years, he's split touches, but you know, it's another situation. I was talking about Dokes and Ford earlier, where it's like, you know, frustrating. It's like, why are you giving touches to this other guy?
Right.
But Zonovan Knight, 750 yards in both of his first 2 seasons for North Carolina State. And he's found the end zone 15 times. In North Carolina State, it's this offense that's kind of been rebuilding itself from a college perspective. If you remember a couple years back, it sounds funny in the NFL now, but this was the offense that had Ryan Finley, Nyheim Hines, Jalen Samuel, and Kelvin Harmon. And it was a really tough college unit. And so they've been rebuilding themselves the last couple of years. And it seems like they're finally back at this point where they're going to be a little bit more in the national spotlight. And Zonovan Knight should be, you know, in line to take over a huge chunk of those carries. So he's somebody, you know, from a deeper perspective that not a lot of folks are probably going to be talking about, but I am all in. You know, if I'm playing in campus to Canton leagues, he's on all my rosters. You know, even in my deeper Devy leagues, Zonovan Knight is absolutely somebody that I'm scooping up everywhere. You know, we talked about the lack of guarantee at the top of the 2022 class. Right. And when you're playing Devy or when you're just, you know, trying to evaluate prospects, that should give you a little bit of motivation to be more aggressive towards some of these guys that haven't quite broken out yet. We see it every year. I mean, who was talking about Javonte Williams at this time last year? Nobody. I wasn't even talking about him. All right. I ended up having him in one campus to Canton league. I got lucky. I drafted him in the 26th round. And you know, so, you know, even sometimes when you hit on guys, you got to get a little bit of luck playing in Devy and some of these deeper styles.
Definitely. Well, Matt, this has been a pleasure, man. I appreciate you coming aboard and speaking to our listeners. And guys out there, I can't stress it enough. Matt is a tremendous follow on Twitter, and definitely check out the Rookie Big Board, his YouTube channel. Matt, is there anything else you would like to plug or anything? The floor is yours.
Yeah, I would just, you know, you brought it up, the podcast, the YouTube channel, Rookie Big Board. That's really fantastic. We really focus on the process, which I think is a lot of what we were trying to talk about today. You know, it's not just reading off rankings and talking about players, you know, kind of what a lot of folks are doing. We're really trying to dig into the process of how to evaluate these guys. And then the last thing I'll throw out, you know, I've been talking about the Rookie Big Board. I've been talking about my Devy rankings. So I have all of that available, as well as my Dynasty rankings at patreon.com/theFFeducator. You know, 168 offensive rookies ranked this year, top 200, 250 Devy. I just added some guys to it, top 200 Dynasty. All of that is just $3 a month at patreon.com/theFFeducator. So I try to make it affordable, try to make it just, you know, help grow the game a little bit, you know, as much as we can. Cause I love Devy. I love looking at these college guys, looking at these rookies. And so just trying to bring more folks in on it. So, you know, I appreciate you having me on here, chopping it up a little bit. And it's fun, man, talking about these rookies. And now we know landing spots. So it's fun. We get to track them through the summer now.
Well, that's going to do it for this video. Check us out at Couch Potato General Manager and at couchpotatogm.com.